Good evening and welcome to the closing event for the 2024-2025 Alison R. Bernstein Media Mentoring Program, Reclaiming Trust in Media, a conversation with Roxane Gay. Tonight, we will hear from Dr. Gay about navigating the complex media and information landscape that we find ourselves in. She will cover various topics, such as identifying reputable news sources, navigating biases, and sharing meaningful content to help foster a more meaningful relationship with media as both consumers and creators. Roxane Gay is a writer, editor, and professor. She is the author of several best-selling books, including Bad Feminist, Hunger, Difficult Women, and Opinions, A Decade of Arguments, Criticism, and Minding Other People's Business. She is also the author of the Eisner Award winning World of Wakanda for Marvel and the editor of Best American Short Stories 2018. Her short stories and essays can be found in Harper's Bazaar, A Public Space, McSweeney's, Tin House, Oxford American, American Short Fiction, Virginia Quarterly Review, and many others. She is a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times and the editor of an eponymous imprint at Grove Atlantic. In 2018, she won a Guggenheim Fellowship. She is currently working on several book and film and TV projects, and her newsletter, The Audacity, is hosted at Substack. Lastly, I have also had the pleasure of working with her for the past 3 years in her role as the Gloria Steinem Endowed Chair in Media, Culture, and Feminist Studies at Rutgers, New Brunswick. I will now turn it over to Dr. Gay.
I'm more than happy to answer questions. In fact, this is more of a Q&A than me just regurgitating things at you. But it has been very interesting to just look at your introductions and to see where you guys are getting your news from, because where we get our news from is a key component of media literacy. We do, in fact, live in the information age, and that's wonderful because we have access to all kinds of information and knowledge, and we have that access at unprecedented speeds. And so it can, when you're very online, make you feel incredibly connected and incredibly in the know. But one of the biggest challenges of this age is that people tend to take anything that's presented online as news, when such is not the case. News is information that is vetted by journalists and that is framed with context and facts, oftentimes research, interviews, and drawing from legitimate sources. And social media is people interpreting news and or distorting news and or simply making things up. And unfortunately, we have an entire class of not even media, but influencers who spend all of their time posing as journalists without journalistic training, and who put all kinds of information into the world that is afactual, sometimes incredibly dangerous, oftentimes just salacious and soundbitey, but not really offering anything of substance. And so, one of the most important things that we have to do is to know where we're getting our news from and why. And that means that in general, we have to look to legitimate sources. Now, even then, it can be a challenge because, for example, the New York Times, who I write for, is a problem. When you look at the way that they present news, sure, there's a lot of excellent journalism happening at the Times. It is absolutely the paper of record. It's probably the most prestigious paper in the world. But they tend to do a lot of journalism that doesn't challenge the status quo. They tend to oftentimes, for example, take information from the current administration and they're very credulous about it. They don't ever seem to question it. They frame things with their headlines in ways that don't actually convey what the articles are actually about. They do a lot of profiles, for example, of white supremacists and Trump voters, because they seem plagued by the mystery of who these people are, even though we know who they are. They're very clear on who they are. They're just like racists. And it's more complex than that, certainly, but not really. And so you have to oftentimes consider, are there any biases in the information that I'm consuming from supposedly legitimate news sources? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is yes. And everything is biased. Journalists love to talk about impartiality, but impartiality does not exist. It is a myth, and it shouldn't even be our goals as communicators and as people who want to put good writing and good thinking into the world. Instead, it's a question of how do you communicate your biases and account for them in your work? And unfortunately, a lot of journalists are unwilling and or unable to answer that question to any kind of satisfaction. And so, because we are dealing with so much misinformation and disinformation and partial information, it's really hard to know who to trust. And depending on your political perspective, sometimes that trust is contingent on the ideology that's being communicated in a given piece of writing. And that's why I tend to turn to public news sources, NPR, PBS. In general, they're very, very good. They have a ton of integrity and they understand that they are serving a broad constituency, which is to say that they recognize that they can't only report from one perspective. And that's why the Trump administration is actually trying to defund public news because they want these news stations to become propaganda arms. And that's just not what public news is supposed to be. The New York Times is reasonably reliable, the Boston Globe, the Philadelphia Inquirer, all of the major newspapers, the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Miami Herald, the Dallas Morning News. But the Washington Post is not so much as reliable as it once was, especially since a few months ago when Jeff Bezos, the paper's owner, decided to start meddling in the newsroom affairs and decided to make the opinion page um, a department that was going to focus only on free markets and I think free markets and free will or something like that. It was very weird. And so that became a source of great consternation for a lot of the journalists and the opinion writers who work for the Post because that means that a lot of the people who have been doing interesting work there no longer have a space to do that work because of this edict from the owner. And so it's really hard to figure out how to get accurate information. And still, it's very possible to get accurate information and to get accurate news. And um, I love TikTok as much as the next person, but when you see someone regurgitating like in a 3-minute soundbite or a 90-second soundbite, like information, they're not journalists. And what they are sharing is not news, that's actually opinion. And there's nothing wrong with opinion, but we have to be able to differentiate as media literate people between opinion writing and journalism, because they're two very different things. And opinion writing is great. And of course, that's my bread and butter. It's writing that reflects perspectives and points of view. It has the same rigor as journalism, but you are offering opinions. They are very subjective. They should be grounded in truth and fact. They're very much backed by research when done well, but your bias is the thing that you're offering. You are telling people what you think and why. And sometimes you're telling people what they should probably think and why. You're trying to persuade people. It's all rhetorical and a way of convincing people. With journalism, you're trying to give people information so that they can know what's going on. And when a journalism is very good, you can also learn like how we got to our present state and how an issue that they're writing about was brought about. And good journalism opens up your understanding of the world just a little bit more. And unfortunately, a lot of people take the sort of nicely packaged or charmingly packaged information from social media and decide that that's news. And if they watch enough videos, they're going to be well informed on a subject. And it's terrifying that we have come to this place because more people are getting their information from this secondary media sphere that's probably no longer secondary, is probably primary. Podcasts, which men should never be allowed to podcast. Don't listen to them. And video podcasts, TikToks, Twitter. Nobody should be on Twitter, because Twitter is just a white supremacist hellhole, and there's no legitimate journalistic reason to be there, no matter what anyone says. The algorithm is such that you are never going to get a healthy range of information. It is a site that is basically an untended garden where the weeds have taken over and they are choking everything that is alive. And so, part of media literacy is also knowing when to stop consuming information from a certain place because that information can no longer be trusted. And I'm someone who was on Twitter for probably 18 years. I loved Twitter. I'll never call it X. And it was great when it was great. And as Elon Musk took over, the quality of experience there degraded, but more importantly, the quality of information degraded. And we started to see a lot of really toxic perspectives that are not just problematic, but just terrible and um, dangerous and targeted at people who want to exist within a politics of grievance. And so we have to make sometimes difficult choices and say, you know what, I'm not going to participate there. I'm not going to put my data on this network. I'm not going to consume any information from this network because it's completely unreliable. And unfortunately, that is currently the case for Twitter. And now there are various alternatives, Mastodon, Blue Sky. Of course, Instagram is around. Facebook, again, Facebook is as problematic as Twitter, but only old people are on Facebook. Um, Threads, which is full of misinformation as well. I mean, that's the challenge, is that almost every place has been polluted by misinformation and or toxic ideologies. And so it's a difficult time. It's a difficult time to be a consumer, and it's a difficult time to be a producer of information. And we haven't yet really grappled as a society with what to do about this. And people on the left, even though this shouldn't be a political issue, unfortunately, it has been made into a political issue, whereas in the past, truth was the truth. But now truth is contingent on the politics of the person who is offering that information into the void. But we're seeing things like, I use an example of vaccines. Vaccines are great. And science has backed this up for more than 100 years. Measles is a disease that was long eradicated, but RFK Jr., who is the Secretary of Health, um, is a crackpot and is not a medical doctor, is not a doctor of any kind, has no science background, is just a guy who likes to lift weights and eat bears, has decided that measles is something that we can just ride out unless you're very sick, which is a eugenicist approach to human life. And so the information that he puts into the world and that he's sanctioning through the various health departments in the federal government is that vaccines are dangerous, that they potentially cause autism, and that if you are healthy, you should be able to ride out certain diseases. Meanwhile, actual factual science tells us that measles is deadly, particularly for children. There's a reason why the vaccine was invented, and it's because we actually don't have to subject ourselves to unnecessary illness. to prove that we are worthy of being on planet Earth. And uh, that is contested now. And it's contested to the point where might actually become endemic again, which when you are of a certain age, that's mind-blowing because we kind of thought we had wrapped measles up the same way we had wrapped up other diseases like rubella. Um, and so in this polluted information culture that has become overly and overtly politicized, the onus is upon us as individuals to do the extra work that we used to be able to trust journalism to do. But we have to do our research, but not in the sort of way, that not all conservatives, but a lot of conservatives talk about, like, I'm going to do my research about vaccine efficacy. I'm going to do my research about fluoride in the water, which, trust me, you want fluoride in your goddamn water. Um, they want to look for information that will reinforce their beliefs. What we have to do is look for information that doesn't necessarily reinforce our beliefs, but that reflects reality and that reflects rigorous knowledge. And how we make sense of the difference between those two things is what we need to be focusing our media literacy efforts on. And this is an education that has to start with children as early as preschool, all the way up through college, because children are consuming media messages all the time, as much as adults are. And the earlier that we teach media literacy, the better equipped people are to manage all of the information pollution that we're currently dealing with. These things are cyclical. I don't think that we're going to deal with misinformation forever, but it's certainly something that we're dealing with now and for the foreseeable future. And the consequences are deadly because what starts out as one crackpot guy has now become public policy. And soon more and more people are going to be dying, and then we're going to have another pandemic on our hands. And whenever you talk about these things, you sort of sound like a conspiracy theorist. And in many ways, the people who are engaging in misinformation are counting on that. They want people who understand science and truth and reality to sound crazy so that their ideas have more oxygen and more space to flourish. Um, it's challenging. It's a really challenging time to think about information and care about information and accuracy and trustworthiness. Um, and we are just now figuring out how um, we can address these problems. And if people who manage things like the not the FAA, the FTC, normally these roles, like who manage information and who manage access to information, those are non-political. And they're non-political for a reason, because truth shouldn't be politicized. And what we're seeing currently with the Trump administration is that he is removing all of the neutral and non-political appointees, and he is installing his own people who are not at all neutral. And that does not bode well for the near future. So, those are just some broad thoughts on media literacy and access to information. But I am very interested in what kinds of questions that you have, and I'm happy to answer questions about what it means to be part of the media in this really difficult time.
I have a question, and Roxanne, thank you so much. I actually just downloaded the NPR app just to get another cycle of news in my life. So thank you. I used to be an avid NPR listener anyway, so it's good that I'm gonna have it now. Um, Everything you say is, it feels like we're now in a time, well, we've been in this time for a while now, but you have to swallow like a major dose of reality, right? And we're all here because we care about this, and this is something that we see as an extreme issue, and we want to educate ourselves on and be literate, right?
Mhm.
And so what do you suggest for the people in our lives, right? The people that mean the world to us. They just happen to not care as much or think hard enough about the media they're consuming, right? And it gets shared with us. And I mean, sometimes I feel like such an asshole when it comes to like my friends and family who will say something to me, and I need to kind of take a step back, and I'm like, is it a lost cause to try and argue or educate? Because they don't want their they don't want the reality. I wrote down, I love you said look for information that reflects reality. But if someone isn't living in the same reality,
Mhm.
where do we go from there?
Well, that's one of the most difficult parts of all of this, is that there are probably 40 or 50 million Americans who are willfully choosing to live in an alternate reality. And when you try to convince them otherwise, you really have to press hard. And many of these people refuse to come over here. And again, a lot of this has to come, I mean, a lot of this comes from information pollution and frankly, Fox News.
Mhm.
Fox News traffics in misinformation all day and all night. It's egregious. And people who are trapped in that information sphere don't want to come out of it because for whatever reason, it's giving them something. It's fulfilling some kind of need. It's reinforcing some inherent belief that they have. I don't want to say that they're a lost cause, but some people are a lost cause for now.
Yeah.
And they're a lost cause until they lose their jobs or they have to deal with a 100% tariff on the next car that they have to buy or the next iPhone that they have to buy. And honestly, even then, it may not knock them back into reality. The only thing you can do is give them information. What they do with it, you can't force them to read like a real newspaper. You can't force them to watch CNN. MSNBC is very liberal. They're very open about their liberal leanings, and there's nothing wrong with that. But again, people like to compare MSNBC and Fox, but Fox is trafficking in lies
Mhm.
and racism. And while MSNBC is very liberal, they are trafficking in truth and
Mhm.
like reality. And then the pundits, the Rachel Maddows of the network, offer their spin. And so it's hard to know how you reach people other than giving them the tools, but then they have to do whatever they want with those tools. And it's hard. And I think that's why we see a lot of fissures in families, in communities. And that's honestly why Trump won, because there are so many people who are in the land of misinformation. And in that part of the world, immigrants are why they don't have $1 billion at their disposal. And vaccines are why a very small fraction, but if it's your child, it's your child, why their child has autism. And um, COVID was a global conspiracy, and masks are um, unnecessary, etc. It's just, it's just for some people, it's easier to believe that they're not the problem or that they just have experienced bad luck. Um, they need to blame someone, and misinformation gives them someone to blame. And so until they free themselves from that need, there's not a lot you can do. But, I'm Haitian, and Haitians love them some YouTube. And one of the big sort of conspiracies that Haitian people engage in is that you can like drink these teas to fucking cure yourself of COVID. And it's like, no. And they also think you can like use these teas to cure yourself of HIV. Uh, And you cannot convince these people, like your uncles and your aunts, you cannot convince them otherwise. Some of them, fortunately, believe that, but will also go get the vaccine. And so, if you can create that third lane where, sure, watch this news, listen, believe these ideas, but also just for shits and giggles, get the vaccine, pay your taxes because you really do have to pay your taxes, whatever the thing is that they're holding on to. I do think that's a way of mediating some of this. And that's certainly what I do with my sort of off-kilter relatives who are like, "Did you have the tea yet?" And I'm always like, "No, I sure didn't." But whatever, here, let me take a sip. And so, yeah, there is that alternative. And it does work for certain things.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hmm. Eliana asks, what advice would you give to someone navigating the media space and attempting to enter the landscape as an entry-level employee and creator? Good luck. It's a tough time to enter the media, but it's always a tough time. And it's not so tough that it's impossible. So, I mean, I think the most important advice I can give you is to go in with a sense of realism, but also like optimistic realism. So many people in the media are very much focused on like doom and gloom. And I get why. Things are rough, and the field has contracted in such a way that there are just a fraction of the jobs now that there were even 5 or 10 years ago. And so it's becoming increasingly difficult to make a life for yourself as a journalist and as anyone working in the media. But it's not impossible. And it's always important to remember that it's not impossible. And that if you approach this kind of work from a place of optimism, that allows you to be more expansive in your thinking. If you're always working from a defensive crouch, you are going to limit yourself in terms of what you can do. You're going to limit yourself in terms of vision. And I don't think that's a great way to enter a field. I also don't think it's a great way to be in a field if you have, more experience. So beginner, mid-career, or late career, I think that while we have to be clear-eyed, we also have to believe that we can create from a place of abundance rather than scarcity.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what you were saying about, individuals doing their research and like I totally get that, but I also just I feel like it's not a very realistic solution, like the end of relying on the individual because we are so time like impoverished these days, like whether because we're all working like multiple jobs or we're working and doing organizing and activism and or like the sort of not not real things like that we get encouraged to spend our times on our phones and like diet culture or like whatever is distracting us. So I'm just wondering if you have any ideas about like more collective solutions um to getting, a higher quality news and information out to people or getting behavioral change. Because I'm also thinking a lot of people, like even for the last like couple decades, have not been educated in terms of like how to be really media literate and understand persuasion tactics and things like that. So I'm just trying to like imagine more collective solutions to this issue. So I was wondering like what your thoughts were on that.
I mean, we don't really have. I mean, the thing is, we already have everything we need. The journalism world exists. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's just that people don't want to believe reality anymore. I honestly don't know. Nobody knows. And that's why we're in this problem. Like, people just don't trust anything anymore. And so we really have to figure out, when did this distrust start? because bad actors are exploiting that distrust. And for the most part, the distrust starts when things stop going your way in your life. And you have to believe that there is some grand design to it. And I don't know how you break people of that. I just don't. And people are busy, but I also think that we have to stop worshiping busyness. Like so many people are very enamored with, I'm so busy, I'm so busy. Are you? Like busy is a choice in some ways. And I'm not talking about people who are like raising children and working 3 or 4 jobs, et cetera, et cetera. I'm talking about most people who are working 1 or 2 jobs and living their lives. Um, like we have to make time for some things. Well, we start to sort of use busy as an excuse to not do anything and to not take any personal responsibility for things. And while we shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel, like journalism exists for the very reasons that you point out, so that we don't actually have to go and do the work. Theoretically, journalism has already done that work, has done the vetting, has done the further work. And so the erosion of trust has enabled people to believe that somehow if they go and look at Wikipedia, they know better. And that goes back to why we have to teach media literacy from preschool upwards so that people understand that Wikipedia is great. It really is. But it is not the be all to end all. It is a human generated and largely unvetted source. And so we have to look at actual encyclopedias and scholar.google.com with all kinds of peer-reviewed things that will maybe not tell you what you want to hear, but will offer accurate information. And then, I mean, and these things are really frustrating because it's like, how did we get here again? It's like, are we really going to head into another dark ages? And then the other thing that people have to do truly, and it sounds very pie in the sky, but it's true, is that we have to run for your library boards and your school boards. You just absolutely do. Because in certain communities, wingnuts are overrepresented. People who don't read books but want to ban them. What? No. And so we have to make sure that we are thinking about how people in our community are being educated. Because right now, especially with Trump, who is literally trying to dismantle the Department of Education, there's a reason why they're doing that. An educated populace is a dangerous populace. An educated populace will say, no, we don't want this. This is crazy. And so they are trying to ensure that they can hold on to power by making the American people dumb. And we have to resist that at every possible turn. And part of that means that we have to stay in control of curricula in our communities so that we can ensure that everyone is receiving a robust education and that that education is not contingent upon wealth. So, I mean, these are huge problems, and it's all very dismaying.
Platforms like TikTok and Instagram often censor content from queer, trans, and BIPOC creators under the guise of community guidelines. What's the path forward for creators who are both impacted and dependent on these systems?
Well, I don't know that anyone's truly dependent on these systems because life existed before these systems. And so one of the first things we have to do is stop believing we're dependent on these, especially as queer people, people on the margins. We have always found ways to communicate and to create community. And they have never been solely contingent upon the whims of one tech billionaire or another. And so part of the answer is that we have to divest ourselves from these systems and create our own, but how we do that, nobody really knows. Um, and then we have to resist. We have to protest when these things happen. We have to, what's the word I'm looking for? Where you protest a decision that, like when you see that your post has been banned, you have to follow up. You have to push back. And it's rarely going to go your way, but if you just comply in advance, if you just say, oh, okay, I guess you're right, then they win and they're wrong. And so you have to at least let them know that even if I don't win this battle, you're not going to just walk all over me without any pushback. That simply is not a tolerable state of affairs. Um, and I do think a lot of people in marginalized communities are starting to think about how do we create information networks that are not contingent upon billionaires. And I don't know that any scalable solutions have been developed yet, but Blue Sky is an interesting alternative because it's far more collective in nature. It is not contingent upon a billionaire, and we can only hope that they don't sell themselves to like Twitter, God forbid, or another company. But it's also to make sure that you are trying to put your ideas into networks where those ideas will be valued. Um, but it's hard. Like Facebook, which is the primary platform that tends to deplatform queer creators, trans creators, etc. Like you don't want to be there anyway. You should leave there. They're terrible and criminal. They're absolutely criminal and they know it. And I think their days are coming because people are only going to tolerate their bullshit for so long. Also, Mark Zuckerberg is deeply unlikable, and that might be the thing that brings him down ultimately.
We had a couple that were around the same topic, so I can read two of them. How do you determine the timeliness, worthiness, readability, and trustworthiness of content that you put out? And then similarly, how do you personally decide which ideas or messages are worth amplifying in such an oversaturated media landscape?
Well, one, you know, one of the things I've noticed in a lot of these questions, because I read the questions before I came here, and I've been thinking about them for a few days, is that there are these things that we take as truth, these sort of common knowledge, common wisdom ideas, um, that everyone is busy, the media landscape is oversaturated. I'm not sure that it actually is. I think that good media is rare. And so you have to know where to find the good media, and that landscape is not at all saturated. And so in terms of like deciding which ideas or messages are worth amplifying, I mean, they have to be ideas that I believe in. I just follow my instincts. And a lot of times when you are trying to participate in the media landscape, you think, oh, I have to write something that's timely. It has to be pegged to something that's happening now. And sure, that can be true. But you want to put things into the world that will be evergreen in some way, that people will be able to read and appreciate not only now, but 5 years from now, 15 years from now. And so I actually focus both on, is this timely, but is it also timeless in some form or fashion? And will people be able to read it and make sense of it and not look at it like it's some ancient artifact, even frankly, a year from now, given the pace of the news cycle these days. And especially these days, as the news cycle is just this relentless vomiting cycle of horror, you have to really think about what can I say that will rise above the roaring crowd. And then in terms of an oversaturated world, stop thinking about it in terms of oversaturation. Not because you want to be in denial, but so many people talk themselves out of using their voices before they even start. Don't think about all that. Just think about what you have to say and say it. Um, and the thing that does cut through the noise and allows cream to rise to the top, so to speak, is using your voice and having a unique voice and making sure you understand how to use that voice. That takes time, it takes experience, but you have to start somewhere. And so have something to say, figure out how you want to say that thing, and do so in the way that only you can. And that's where your voice comes in. And then you hope for the best. And maybe you'll be heard, maybe you won't, but you won't know until you try. You really won't. And so not saying anything and sort of saying, oh, everything's too saturated, there's no space for me, is not productive. And it's also not true.
A couple other similar questions or about how to like, I guess, educate the next generation. So there was one, as someone who has created across multiple media, writing, editing, teaching, what do you believe is your most urgent lesson for the next generation of media makers? And then similarly, like, how do we educate the next generation about like censorship and scrubbed history,
Mhm.
especially during this time?
Well, the most important thing is that facts are facts. We have to continue to believe in the importance of facts and the importance of history because we're seeing in real time so much ahistoricity that it's almost hard to believe. The way that they're trying to rewrite enslavement as this benevolent institution that wasn't that bad is uh, is appalling. And so we have to find ways of preserving knowledge so that when children who are being educated in Oklahoma, for example, and that's not picking on Oklahoma, that's just Oklahoma is one of the states where we're seeing this revisionism. Um, we have to be able to present them with information in a way that is hopefully not too much of a culture shock, to say, like, that's actually not what happened. But it's hard. It's hard. And in terms of how we educate people, like we have to focus on solid curricula that reflect reality and reflect fact, and that honestly don't have political biases. And it's hard, but we also have to teach people how to judge media to determine, is this factual, is it not? Um, and a lot of that is like research and what is the quality of the site or the source where you're getting this kind of information from. If it's a podcast, that's not a reliable source. That's just a person with a microphone. Sorry, but that's the reality. I think podcasts are fine. I think that they're clearly an important source of media. I think podcasts were critical in the previous election, so we can't ignore it. And unfortunately, liberals have not figured out how to create our own secondary information network. So we do have to work on that. But we have to help people to understand the difference between someone in their basement talking into a microphone and a journalist who has spent weeks working on a story that has been reported out and that has backup and factual information behind it. And it's not at all opinion, it's an accounting of what actually happened. And it's hard. It shouldn't be. It's never been hard before. It's hard now. And the other thing that I think people have to focus on is, and this is why AI is so dangerous. We have to resist AI at all costs. And people are like, oh no, it's so innovative. It saves so much time. Like I get my email summarized. First of all, how long is your goddamn email that you need it summarized? The summary is the same length as the email and worse. And so we really have to resist AI because what AI does is supplant thinking and it offloads our like need to communicate. It absolutely is going to make people dumber. It is not smarter, it is not faster, it is not more efficient, it is mediocre. It is a mediocre product that only exists because it has stolen copyrighted work, mine included, so of course I'm a little bitter about it. Um, and so we have to hold the line and say that we are not going to outsource our intellectualism because it saves us a few minutes. And a lot of students are like, I'm busy. We're all busy. And you are not the first generation of students. Like this generation of students seems particularly under the belief that no one has ever had to like go to college and work multiple jobs, et cetera. And that's why like you have to use AI. You don't. It's a choice. And I don't say that lightly. I get the way that people feel overwhelmed by the amount of responsibilities they have. But the solution isn't outsourcing your thinking. The solution is creating a more equitable world where people can go to college and only go to college. Like, let's address the actual problem. AI isn't a solution. AI only encourages this world to put more and more burdens on students and expect more and more of them instead of allowing them to just be young and to just educate themselves and have the financial means to do so because we support education. Um, and so I think that's also part of media literacy is making sure that we are creating that media ourselves and we are not allowing a non-sentient artificial intelligence to do so. Yes, Lisa.
I wanted to ask you about information in relation to political campaigns.
Hmm.
New Jersey is one of two states where we have a gubernatorial election. It's very important who becomes governor of New Jersey. I listened to both the Republican and the Democratic candidates' debates and was struck by the low level of communication, the lack of information, and the soundbite
Hmm.
culture that we have. So as consumers, what can we do to push back on that? We are being treated as though so that we don't know how to think.
Hmm.
We're not literate, and our choices are getting. I don't see why a really good candidate would jump into this fray of terrible communication and name calling and yelling and so forth.
It's, I don't know. That one is something that keeps me up at night. But part of what we have to do is demand that our politicians do better. I remember when Kamala Harris started running. Now, to be fair, she was put into an impossible situation. They did not give her, because Joe Biden went back on his word. He said he was only going to run once. And then this a fucking asshole decided, oh, there's no one more qualified in this country to lead than I, a man who is old, which is not a problem, but who is of diminishing capacity. And so he set Kamala Harris up for failure. And when she put up her website, the first thing that she put up was a fundraising page. And the policy page was empty. And I tracked it. It stayed empty for weeks. And then when she did put policies up, they were just like 10 words for each item. And we're allowing these politicians to get away with that. We have to press them and say, no, I want pages and pages of policy. Now they're doing that because that's how little they think of the electorate.
Right.
We reinforce that by not asking for any more. And so we do have to ask for more. We may not get it, but I firmly believe in saying no. Like, I believe in open borders is not a policy, that's a slogan. And unfortunately, many of our politicians of all political persuasions are only interested in sloganeering. And as you noted, finding little sound bites and trusting that that's going to be enough to get them elected. When you listen to Donald Trump talk, I don't want to insult 5-year-olds because they're smart and lovely, but he sounds like a toddler. He can't even use words with multiple syllables. Something is profoundly wrong with him. He is not smart and he doesn't care. And he talks to people like, oh, I'm going to have my tariffs and they're going to be so beautiful. Oh, are they? Really? And like, what does that mean? What is a beautiful tariff? And oh, and the government of Qatar is going to give me a plane. It's going to be so beautiful. You mean a $400 million bribe? Like, nobody pushes back on these things. Or I will say many people push back, but they don't get heard because they're ignored. And often the people that are pushing back are community activists. They are often queer, or people of color or working class people who are like, no, I'm going to need a little more information there, buddy. And then they don't get that more information, or the politician tells them, yes, my office will be in touch. And it's not true. Like Ted Lieu is my congressman in California. And I'm going to tell you the headline of the stupid ass email he sent me. He said that he sends everyone in his district. Where is it? It was so weird that I just thought, wait, is Ted being serious here? No, that can't be. But it was something like a special kind of stupid. That was the name of the email. And it was all about the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico. And I don't know why he was sending that, but like that's what he thought he should lead with, given all of the problems in his district. And, in LA, we have a huge unhoused problem. People do not understand the scope and scale of this problem in LA. It's so heartbreaking and it's so overwhelming and it's pervasive. There is no single place in the city that you can go other than Beverly Hills because they kick them out every day, where you will not see unhoused people just living on the sidewalks everywhere. And that's not a problem other than that it's a problem that they deserve better. They deserve to have potable water and shelter and safety. And we have all of the means within our disposal. But here's my congressman talking about the Gulf of fucking Mexico. It's just we don't expect better, and so they don't do better. And it's just an uphill battle, but I do think it's an uphill battle that we have to participate in as much as we can. Like, and I'm glad that you went to the debate and, write these candidates and just say, you're going to have to do better, especially governor. Governor, you can go from governor to president. Like, you're going to have to do better, my friend. You cannot just sit here and shit the bed and think it's going to work out.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. I have another question, Roxane. I think
Absolutely.
one thing that is abundantly clear is that media literacy requires effort from all of your responses. It's an active process. And I've been thinking a lot as you've been talking about this, about the difference between media literacy and media consumption. And I think many people do a lot of media consumption or participate in a lot of media consumption, but don't necessarily concern themselves with media literacy. And is that part of the educational gap that we have to overcome? And I'm curious, when you're thinking about this process as somebody who consumes a lot of news and curates thoughts and opinions for a lot of people who rely on them, what's your process? Is there a difference between media consumption and media literacy for you? Like where you stop consuming media and then you're actively questioning or thinking about it? Because I'm feeling like that's maybe where that disconnect is. Because anybody who even wants to talk about something that they're interested in, so often people have such scripts developed, which mimics like a lot of the rhetoric that you were talking about from pundits or something else. So I was just curious if you could let us into what that process is like for you. Thank you.
Of course, there's a huge difference between media consumption and media literacy. And one of the biggest problems that we're facing is that people are consuming media and they're doing so uncritically. And whether it's music, film, television, books, like people are just like, if it scratches that itch, if it makes me happy, then it can't be that bad, which is a song lyric if you're my age. And that's a problem. And that this is why like feminists and other people who care about like the state of the world are often framed as killjoys, and we take no pleasure in it because sometimes you do just want to watch TV and you don't want to think about like all of the messaging that contributed to the media or like the studio system that contributed to this movie being made, etc. But too much uncritical thinking is what will get us dumber and dumber media and more toxic ideas. And so I think that people should enjoy what they enjoy. I do, within reason. But I also think that we need to understand why we enjoy it. We need to understand why it was made. And, like take, for example, The Bachelor. I love The Bachelor. I've written essays in praise of The Bachelor as entertainment. But I can enjoy The Bachelor because I understand that it's designed to reinforce heteronormativity and that it is predicated on beauty standards and ideas about thinness. And like all of the people are pharmaceutical reps or personal trainers, and they all have fake tans, and the women have extensions and impossibly fit bodies because, like, clearly all they do is work out. Like, you have to understand, like, why we're seeing this. We never see fat people on The Bachelor, even though fat people are abundant in more ways than one. Um, we never see people who are not conventionally attractive. And so we should be thinking about the why of that and what it means. We should be thinking about why we're made to believe that um, a woman should settle, for example, like when The Bachelor is only so-so. Why do we tell a woman that this is what she should want for herself? Why do we even tell men that this is what they should want for themselves? Um, And that's why it's so hard for me to enjoy television. But I do. I fight my way through it. And so I just try to balance thinking about these things and then just enjoying what I'm watching. But I can enjoy it because I understand. There are many people who watch The Bachelor and then that's what they yearn for is that true love story and like going on a date on a helicopter ride around the city and like being swept off your feet. And then when they go on a date and their boyfriend takes them to Sonic, like then they're like, wait, where's my Prince Charming? Where's my Rose? Romance novels do this too. Lots of things set people up for false expectations about romance, but that's just one example. And so when I'm presenting information to people, I always try to provide enough context so that they can understand where I got the information from, if necessary, why I'm sharing it, and what I think they should take away from it. But I also hope in my writing that I leave space for people to make their own, draw their own conclusions and take what they want from the piece. Now, you can't all you can control is what you put on the page. And so sometimes that runs amok. Like when I wrote my book Bad Feminist and the title essay in particular, I was actually thinking through a lot of these issues about like how I love hip hop and yet I believe women are people. Um, and so many lyrics in hip hop and all music, regardless of genre, tend to be very misogynistic. So how can I enjoy that as a woman who believes in personhood and my right to bodily autonomy, my right to all of the liberties that men enjoy? Um, and so it's hard. And that's why I was like, haha, I'm a bad feminist. What people took from that essay was that I can believe any old bullshit and I can still be a feminist. And women who were pro-life in particular really latched on this, like, oh, I'm pro-life, but ha ha ha, I'm a bad feminist. And unfortunately, I had to tell these women to their faces, girl, no, you're not. You are just bad. And so I'm mindful that I can only do so much. I can only control so much. And I have to trust my readers to an extent. And then also follow up and gently correct or not so gently, depending on the instance, when I see people wildly misinterpreting the work. But it's rare that I have to do that because it's rare that I can even do that. And also, I recognize that I've already done my job, and it's not my job to like hold the reader's hand as they make sense of the work and agree or disagree or both with the ideas that I've presented. Oh, yes, Laura.
Hi, if I'm allowed to ask another second question.
Yeah, of course.
As we're talking, I'm thinking about this question of building trust in media and also like the cult of personality that like era we kind of live in. And I feel like when people are overwhelmed, like it's very easy for us to like latch on to people that we feel like we trust, like whether that's like a writer like yourself, where we're like, you know, I understand their background and that they research things. And so I like to go to that person as a source, but like that could also easily go wrong, right? Like if you're trusting, you know, someone who has different priorities.
Mhm.
So I'm guessing, I guess my question is like, do you see a place in like a more healthy media landscape for like this personality trust building? And like I feel like the influencer culture is like part of that. Like, do you see a place for that in a more balanced environment?
I don't, depending. Like Joe Rogan is deeply toxic and deeply dangerous, but he also has the ears of like 150 billion people. So we can't ignore it. And unfortunately, a lot of progressives tend to just sort of think it'll go away. It's not going away. And so we actually have to deal with it somehow. And we need more media personalities that capture the imagination in that way. But unfortunately, we are selling truth and they're selling fantasy. People are always going to choose fantasy. And that's the problem with the influencers. Like these influencers are not genuine people. I'm not here to like interrupt someone's hustle. Do what you need to do. But there's a great Instagram account called Influencers in the Wild, and it's of people taking pictures of people who are influencers. And I travel a lot, so I see people like setting up the perfect photo in like some beautiful country. And I'm always chuckling because I'm just like, yeah, yeah. And then you're gonna like make your little TikTok, but nobody's gonna see this little pre-work. And again, influencers are selling fantasies. They're selling fantasies of thinness or traditional wifehood and domesticity, parenthood. Like the women with like 12 children who are always looking like so happy and those children all dressed. Like you don't see the four nannies that are not on camera. And so when we have to find ways to impart to people that when you're seeing an influencer, you're seeing like a fourth of the screen, and then just beyond the lens, the frame, is where the reality is happening. And many of these influencers are just straight up frauds. Like the one girl on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, and I watch her little TikToks. I fell into wealthy TikTok somehow. And she's not wealthy at all. It's all made up. And that's okay. I don't care. I think it's fucking harmless. Like that she doesn't really own these Birkins. It's her friend's closet that she was filming all this content in. But we have to find ways to impart to people that influencers are not journalists. They're not telling us the truth in ways that are reliable. They're selling something. And we have to understand the difference between information and marketing. And so it goes back to the same thing, education. And some people want to learn, and some people just want to consume blindly. And I think there will always be that divide among people, primarily in the US. It's not really this way in the rest of the world. It's not that the rest of the world is a paradise, but because I travel a lot, and anytime I leave the country, people are like, "So what's going on there?" I'm just like, I don't know her. I don't know. But there's just media literacy is more of a given in, especially I would say European countries than in the rest of the world. Um, and I think there's a lesson to be learned there that it does matter, it does need to be taught, and that it does work if you allow it to work. Yes, Lisa.
There's so many interesting things that you brought up, and this idea of what is being sold to us. And I think from the very beginning, we are taught to be consumers, but we aren't taught to think. And I remember years back, I interviewed a former faculty at Douglas who taught a course called How to Think.
Mhm.
And she taught it to all Douglas women. And I thought, oh, where's the syllabus for that course? Now we know so much more about the brain, but we don't know that much more about how to teach people to understand their biases, to know, to think, to know the difference between cause and effect. And I mean, how can we change education?
I don't know. That one I don't know. One of the key things that we can do is stop tying education budgets to property taxes. That's the most important thing that we can do so that there is more equity across school districts. Because people in wealthy neighborhoods, their children basically go to private schools that are publicly funded. We have to get rid of the voucher system because it is corrupt and it, again, is essentially privatizing something that we should be able to handle in the public sphere. And when you look at private schools, the reason they're so great educationally most of the time is because they have the money to spend. Education, good education is expensive, and nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to pay teachers. Nobody wants to pay for books to actually be in libraries. Nobody wants to devote the resources that would actually contribute to a robust education. And so we have to treat public education the way we treat private education. And that means we just have to spend more money on education. And we have the money, honestly. We do.
Yes.
It's all
Yes.
going to the Department of Defense. If we took, I don't know, a 15th, a 50th of the the budget for education, we could solve this problem. We could also solve the housing problem, and we could solve hunger in this country. It's about priorities, and we have none. We collectively, not us. We're great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I know we're a little over time, but this was great, and I appreciate that you answered all these questions and rounded out our media mentoring year. So thank you, and thank you to the audience for coming on and asking all these questions. Um, and yes, have a great summer, everyone.
Happy summer, guys, and happy graduation to those of you who are leaving.